Piracy is back. It's 2025. Streaming was supposed to kill piracy. Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, and a dozen other platforms promised to make piracy irrelevant. Why would anyone pirate when everything's legal and convenient? Here's how that worked out. 216 billion visits to piracy websites in 2024. That's not a typo. 216 billion. To put that in perspective, if every piracy visit was $1, you could buy Disney twice and still have enough left over to make Scrooge McDuck uncomfortable. But here's what's truly wild about that number. It's actually going up. After a decade of decline, piracy is back with a vengeance, and streaming executives are absolutely losing their minds over it. But before we get to why they're panicking, I need to tell you about the one thing that almost killed piracy forever. And spoiler alert, it wasn't lawyers, it wasn't encryption, and it definitely wasn't those "you wouldn't download a car" ads. It was Netflix. Well, sort of. Let me explain. Remember 2010? BitTorrent was eating up more bandwidth than every legitimate service combined. The Pirate Bay had more traffic than CNN. And LimeWire? Oh, LimeWire was basically a digital roulette wheel where you had a 50-50 chance of downloading either the movie you wanted or a virus named definitelynotavirus.exe. People weren't pirating because they were evil. They were pirating because buying a DVD meant driving to Blockbuster, hoping they had it in stock, and then paying late fees that somehow cost more than the movie itself. Piracy was just easier. The music industry was in full panic mode. They sued a 12-year-old girl. They sued a dead person. They were throwing lawsuits around like confetti at a very angry parade. And then something bizarre happened. Piracy just stopped. Well, not stopped, but it fell off a cliff. Between 2011 and 2015, illegal downloads dropped by more than 50%. So what killed piracy? Here's what didn't kill it: lawsuits, DRM, those increasingly desperate FBI warnings at the start of DVDs. What actually killed it was something nobody expected. But before I tell you what it was, we need to talk about why it stopped working. Because that's the really interesting part. The answer was stupidly simple: convenience. Spotify launched and said, hey, what if you could listen to any song ever made for the price of a latte per month? Netflix showed up and said, what if you could watch anything without leaving your couch? No torrents, no Russian subtitles, no accidentally downloading Shrek but in Mandarin. And iTunes proved you could sell digital movies without DRM handcuffs and people would actually buy them. Piracy collapsed, not because it became harder, it actually got easier, but because legal streaming became even more convenient. It was a miracle. Gabe Newell, the founder of Steam, nailed it. Piracy is almost always a service problem, not a pricing problem. For a brief, beautiful moment, streaming platforms understood this. They made piracy look like too much work. Why download a grainy cam rip when you could stream HD quality instantly? Why risk malware when Netflix cost less than a sandwich? Piracy became the domain of either the extremely broke or the extremely stubborn. The war was over. Streaming won. And then, for reasons we're about to get into, streaming decided to declare war on itself. But first, I need to tell you about a number that explains everything. Netflix is worth about $400 billion. Let that sink in. Not 400 million, billion with a B. Last year, they made $8.7 billion in profit. Sounds great, right? Here's the problem. If you do the math on that valuation, investors would need to wait about 46 years to get their money back. 46 years. That's not a business model, that's a retirement plan. So Netflix, and every other streaming platform, started doing what every company does when Wall Street starts asking uncomfortable questions. They started squeezing. Prices went up. Password sharing got obliterated. Ads came back like that ex who just wants to be friends. But the real problem wasn't Netflix. It was the other studios watching Netflix make money and thinking, wait, why are we giving them 30% when we could make our own platform? Disney pulled everything for Disney+. Warner Bros. Made HBO Max. Paramount made Paramount+. NBC made Peacock. Apple made Apple TV+. Amazon made Prime Video, even though it already existed. Suddenly, watching one show meant having 6 different subscriptions, each with their own app, their own interface, and their own very strong opinions about which seasons actually belong on their platform. The Office bounced between Netflix and Peacock like a corporate hostage. Friends went to HBO Max, then to Netflix, then back to HBO Max, then to nowhere, because apparently even fictional Friends can't handle this much drama. And here's the truly insane part. This fragmentation is exactly what piracy offered in the first place. One place, everything, no hunting. Streaming platforms spent a decade teaching us that convenience beats piracy, and then they systematically removed all the convenience. So now we're at 216 billion piracy visits, and climbing. But surely the platforms are fighting back, right? Oh, they're fighting. But what they're fighting might surprise you. Let's talk about what streaming platforms are doing to stop piracy. Digital rights management. They encrypt everything so heavily that sometimes your own legally purchased content won't play because your device looked at it funny. Watermarking. They embed invisible marks in the video, so if you screen record something, they can theoretically trace it back to you. This has definitely stopped piracy and not just made pirates slightly more careful. Piracy detection software. Bots that scan the internet 24/7 looking for illegal content. These bots have probably issued more takedown notices than there are atoms in the universe. Geo-blocking. The thing that makes you, a paying customer, unable to watch a show you paid for because you dared to go on vacation. Multi-factor authentication, because nothing says convenient entertainment like getting a text code every time you want to watch TV. You know what's missing from that list? Making the service better. It's like trying to stop people from going to a competitor by making your own product worse and then building a wall around it. Of the 20 most expensive movies ever made, 19 came out in the last decade. Avatar: The Way of Water cost $400 million. Avengers: Endgame cost $356 million. Fast X somehow cost $340 million, despite being the 10th movie about family and muscle cars. Studios justified these insane budgets by saying these tentpole films would drive subscriptions. And they were right. For exactly 1 month, people would subscribe to watch the new Marvel show, then cancel immediately after. Studios called this churn. Users called it not being idiots. Meanwhile, the mid-budget films, the $30 to $50 million movies that were actually good and built loyal audiences, disappeared. Because why make 10 interesting movies when you could make one $400 million gamble that might work? But here's the crazy part. There's one industry that actually figured this out. And what they did is almost embarrassingly simple. Music streaming works. Not perfectly. Ask any independent artist about Spotify's per-stream payouts and watch them age in real time. But it works. Spotify has 200 million songs. Apple Music has basically the same. YouTube Music has everything, including that song from a commercial in 2003 that you've been trying to remember for 15 years. Music piracy still exists, but it's basically a rounding error now. Here's what music did right. They unified the content. You don't need Spotify for Taylor Swift, Apple Music for the Beatles, and YouTube for that one indie band from Portland. It's all everywhere. Music didn't defeat piracy, they made it unnecessary. Movies and TV could have done this. They almost did this. Instead, they chose the tech arms race, and along the way, they started telling you a very specific story about why piracy is bad. Here's what streaming platforms will tell you about piracy risks. Malware. True, piracy sites are basically digital petri dishes. You're one wrong click away from turning your computer into a Bitcoin mining slave. Legal consequences. Also true. You could get fined, sued, or have your ISP send you a very stern letter that your mom might see. Poor quality. Absolutely. Nothing says cinema like watching a cam rip where someone stands up in front of the camera every 15 minutes. You're hurting creators. This one's complicated because streaming platforms say this while paying creators basically nothing and keeping 90% of subscription fees. The biggest risk of piracy isn't legal trouble or malware. It's that if enough people pirate, streaming platforms will use it as an excuse to make their services even worse. People are pirating because we're not profitable enough. Better raise prices again. Better add more ads. Better remove more features. It's a death spiral, and both sides are in the cockpit arguing about who gets to crash the plane. The music industry learned that you can't force people to pay premium prices for an inferior product. The film industry learned that if you make the product expensive enough, surely that will work. Spoiler, it did not work. And that brings us to the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to say out loud. Here's the thing that makes this entire situation darkly hilarious. We already know the solution. Music figured it out. Gaming figured it out. Steam has basically zero piracy issues. Even books figured it out with Kindle Unlimited. The solution is dead simple. Make legal access more convenient than piracy. That's it. That's the whole thing. But instead, streaming platforms are doing the opposite. They're raising prices while removing content. They're adding ads to paid subscriptions. They're splitting content across 47 different platforms and then acting shocked when people go back to the one-stop shop of piracy. Netflix made $8.7 billion in profit last year. Disney Plus has 150 million subscribers. These companies aren't struggling. They're just stuck in a growth model that demands infinite expansion in a finite world. So they squeeze, and we leave, and piracy grows. And honestly, they kind of deserve it. Because here's what they forgot. We want to pay. We proved that in 2015 when piracy nearly died. We just want the product to not suck. Is that really too much to ask? 216 billion piracy visits say, apparently, yes.